Dishonored 2 launches in a few short months, so we recently took the opportunity to talk to the game's creative director, Harvey Smith, about everything and anything he could tell us about Emily Kaldwin, Corvo, the nightmare of complex level design, the response from fans, his own inspirations, and how the chaos system and other mechanics have changed. So let's dive right in, shall we?
It's a very organic process for us. Like, initially we didn't know there would be a sequel, so we weren't thinking about it. We weren't planning for the future, like leaving seeds for, whatever. But the game did really well. It beat our forecast by quite a lot. It hit the creative judgment marks, whatever you call it, that we wanted, the scores. We were very lucky. We had a good team. We were given more time when we needed it, etc. So we started working on some DLC that we were pretty happy with, and we did a lot of experimenting in it. We added voice, we switched protagonists, we added some characters we really liked. And during that time, I knew, okay, we're going to be working on a sequel, and I'm going to be working on it. Because my creative partner, Rafael Colantonio, was switching gears. He wanted to do something different and work more closely with the Austin team. I knew I was going to go work with the Lyon team, or rather along the way, that's something we worked out. And I'm compressing all that, but this organically happened over a period of time, lots of conversations with me and Raph. And when I was thinking about it, as I might have mentioned to people, the thing that kept coming back to mind, we could have just done a quick sequel where we hey, Corvo's got another adventure or whatever, he's in trouble again. It's a year later, old Corvo, yeah. But instead, what we kept thinking about was Emily, it sounds so intuitive now, but it was not exactly an intuitive leap back then because she's a 10-year-old girl. Yeah. She was the moral reflectivity for the game, and so many people responded to her, which is a risk because whenever you put a kid in a video game, there's a very high chance that they're just annoying, right? That everyone hates them. Well, it's a lesson for game developers, especially with a narrative bent, because we put a tremendous amount of work into Emily's dialogue changing based on how you were playing. But what everybody mentions is the crayon drawing that the artist did really quickly to support it, So it either says daddy and it's all happy, or it's disturbed monster drawing, right? People are very visual. They respond very quickly to visuals. And maybe both supported them, because we have had people also say wow, she said something when I'm Empress, if anyone disagrees with me, I'm gonna, whatever she says, I don't even remember. But pretty quickly, that was the most interesting thing, and I couldn't stop thinking about that. And so one day I was just how far in the future would we have to push this series? And that's a big deal, right? Because it means times have changed, you have more lore continuity to deal with, you have new technology devices that you have to create. You're out of the plague, because initially people were well, I guess we'll do another plague. And I was I don't know about another plague. I don't know if every project we're going to do a plague here, but there's also the risk of okay, well, if the first game is in an alternate world with a different calendar and everything else, but roughly parallels 1837, because we kind of are going for this Victorian sweet spot, right? The second game is 1852, I guess. If you push it too far out of that, do you lose your gas lamp steampunk kind of vibe or something? Yeah, your Clockwork Time. But anyway, 15 years in the future. And by the way, we decided 1837 in our calendar because that was the year Spring Hill Jack was sighted in London. And so a guy in a mask jumping from rooftop to rooftop killing people. And so we were and that wasn't planned, that was later we were what if we just said that was 1837 because Corvo, that's the year that he does all his stuff and gets marked by the outsider and checks out, yeah. So anyway, 15 years in the future, Sashka Duval and I, she's the narrative designer for the game, she and I eventually put together a timeline. When we made Dishonored 1, Raph and I and the teams in Lyon and Austin, we didn't have a timeline. We were just moving forward. And then at some point when you make a sequel, you have to go wait a second. So Sashka and I made this timeline. It's in the lore book that we made. Part of it is. We didn't want to spoil the game. And it was okay, move forward by 15 years, and Emily is 25. She's a ruler. She's both what you'd expect as an empress, the best tutors, the best clothes, the best foods. She lives in a palace, but she also had her life completely punctured by this moment of darkness. And so you could in fact see she has all her own powers, and you could see her powers as being, well, you could see them like related to her role as Empress, right? She has Mesmerize for a crowd. She has Domino, where she links people so they share a fate. But then she also has Shadow Walk, which is she has this moment of darkness, literally. But anyway, Emily pretty quickly became the character that we thought, this is the most interesting thing that we could do. This is where our hearts are going, in a weird way. These huge, expensive business decisions get made by a handful of people that are like excited about something, right? And later the players feel that excitement, or they don't if it's not there, Well, you start for a few minutes, you play as Emily no matter what, and you see Corvo. You have a scene with Corvo and in the throne room, and then there's an inciting incident, and you make a decision at that point. Corvo, Emily, and you can kind of swing the camera back and forth. I work with such strong artists. Very seldom do I ever push anything visual. I talk about the game design, I talk about the narrative, I talk about the level design, and I have strong people in those areas too. But in this case, I just saw this throne room scene where they're surrounded by people with knives, back to back, father-daughter, and he's like world-weary and older and a man who's seen too much, now voiced by Stephen Russell, who does a brilliant job. And she's the young Empress who is maybe a little bored with her role and doesn't really realize yet the impact that how good a job she does or not will have on the people around her. Everybody's fate is linked to her fate. But she's Emily Kaldwin. She would have probably been an entitled brat, but she knows how bad things can get. She's more than that. And she's voiced by Erica Luttrell, who did a brilliant job. But anyway, I had this vision of the two of them back to back, surrounded by people with knives, and the player able to swing the camera back and forth. And, I described that to people, including that little sound effect. Exactly. And, of course, the artists at Arcane, they did a better job than I ever could have imagined, actually. And but yeah, at that point, you choose either Emily or Corvo, and then you play that character till the end of the game, and you leave the other character behind. So, no, you I don't want to give a spoiler, but you leave the other character behind, and that's the way you play the game. Either Emily or Corvo, and you advance your character much more deeply this time than last time. You affect the morality of the world or the stability of the world through your actions. Well, it's risky. We've already had people on Twitter, people I love, by the way, playing armchair game designer, which I also love, and I also do from a distance. Well, it's interesting that you chose that, but we've already had people say, wait a second, doesn't that have the following negative effects? There's several ways you could critique that. And I think we've done an approach that people will generally like, because the point spread between sympathetic, guilty, or murderous people is not that far. It's not like black and white. It still adds up if you kill people, anybody, to destabilizing the world. It just destabilizes the world more if you kill people that have some sort of positive role in society. That's the way. And you could say, well, but who's to say what's a positive role or not? And you'll just have to trust me. We stay clear of subtle judgments like that, like a fireman is not worth more than a baker or something like that. We don't do that, right? And it's still entirely possible to play the game without killing anybody, and that is in fact the way to have the least destabilized ending. You can go the other way, butcher everyone, and have the I'm the dark hero kind of ending as well, so the game supports both of those. It is, yeah. It's mostly a nightmare from a level design standpoint. So Christophe Carrier, our level design director, and Joachim David, our lead level designer, those guys are part of our secret sauce, and they went way out of their way to make this possible. But yeah, I mean, you allude to a couple of things that people were really happy with Dishonored. We were very pleased with the player response, but everybody pretty consistently had probably 4 or 5 things that they critiqued us on. And this wasn't always the majority of the players. Sometimes it was a minority of the players, but some people thought the game should be a little bit longer. I think on average, for the average player, Dishonored 1 was probably 8 to 12 hours. And I think from our play tests, I think Dishonored 2 is probably 12 to 20 hours based on how you play. It's a little bit broader range, and it's a longer game. It's 1.5 missions longer, depending on how you count our missions. Almost all the missions are 20% bigger or so. They almost all have like a little urban attachment around the mission location. They're all mini open worlds, right? That was one minor critique we got. Another was the black and white morality, which we've not only had many permutations of end games now, but also the way we calculate chaos is different, and the way the heart works is more in line with what players were trying to do with it anyway. Using it as a guide to tell them, should I care about this person in the world or not? Yeah. What do I think? Contextualize this guard for me. Is he just doing his job, or is he like a real dick? Another minor complaint from some people was related to how hard the game was. Right, like most players thought it was just on normal. That's hard enough, and if they want a bigger challenge, they do what you did, the clean hands or whatever, right? And hopefully they didn't get screwed by leaving a sleeping body where rats could get to it, or I think we patched that so that it made it less likely. But I've had 100 people come up to me and say, somewhere I left a guy on a slanted roof and he slowly slid and then fell 4 stories and exploded on the concrete or whatever. But anyway, there was an issue where some people, a small group said, I would really like a harder version of the game. And so not only we have 4 difficulty levels, and the hardest, very hard, is harder than before. And we try to make the easy level just almost like a tourist mode, right? Like if you want to explore the world, sneaking is very easy. You can follow the lore, etc. But there's not only like very hard now and trying to ghost the game so that if you don't want to kill anybody or no one even detects that you're there, that's possible. But you can also say no to the outsider when he talks to you. I don't remember what Emily's line is, but Corvo's is something like, I've had enough of your gifts, and you can play the game flesh and steel without any powers. And it does totally change things, and then there still has to be a path through the world and a way to accomplish the non-lethals and all of that stuff. I was going to say something a minute ago when we were talking about people accidentally dying. That was a very powerful moment for me in the original Thief, where I was in a small room, like a wine cellar or something, and it had like a ramp down into an underground river, because some of the castles in Thief had like underground, canals and rivers. Like, it's a classic, right? And there was a servant or somebody, a chambermaid or somebody, and I used the blackjack to knock her out. And I was trying to figure out what to do. I was looting the room, and I heard a guard grumbling and mumbling and coming down the stairs into the area. And I was in a bad state health-wise. I was out of certain types of arrows, and my health was low. And so I panicked with her body, and I was like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I laid her body on the ramp, and then I hid somewhere. And the guard came in the room. He was looking around. And I looked over, and the woman was slowly sliding down the ramp. And I was like, I had this epiphany of what's going to happen, because back then it wasn't obvious that maybe she would drown. Had they thought of that? Maybe she'll just slide in the water and I'm okay because she's knocked out. But she slid into the water and I stayed hidden, and the guard was there. And then as I was hiding, I heard her, the characters in this scenario in Thief have a death rattle, I guess, where they go, and she did, and I just had this powerful emotional reaction. And it's just one of many experiences along the way that differentiate the kinds of video games I don't want to play from the ones I do. It's a sandbox, and there's something powerful about that. There's something powerful about formulating a plan, even if it's the most mundane circumstances. It's not like I'm dropping out of a ship with, the sword of some angel falling toward the giant demon eye of whatever to explode the world. It's not like I'm doing something like that. It's a little thing. What am I going to do with this chambermaid that I've knocked out? Oh my God, she's sliding into the sewage canal. Yeah, that's both sublime and frustrating, because We do so much work that players don't see. I don't know what percentage of the game you see in one playthrough, but it's got to be something like 20%. Because, like, first of all, if you play Emily versus Corvo, you have a different set of powers, you have different voice lines for what's going on. Characters have different voice lines to you because of who you are. There's that. That immediately cuts out some big percentage, whether you choose Corvo or Emily. But then whether you take the very violent approach, you probably don't hear all the conversations. If you play fast, you don't read everything. The pace changes how much you see entirely in our game, eavesdropping and etc. But then if you take Domino and upgrade it fully, and you take Shadow Walk and upgrade it fully, you probably don't have enough runes to upgrade Mesmerize fully. And so, and therefore you also you can't get Corvo's Rat Swarm and the new tree under that. And if you go left, you can't go right. If you go over the rooftop, you can't possess the fish and swim through the river. You know, like, it's we do have super fans that play like 10 times or whatever, but the average player is going to play once or twice, I would think. Yeah, it's funny. You know when you've touched someone's life versus when you've just made a diversionary video game. The number of people that still talk about Deus Ex, the number of people that talk about Dishonored. For Raphael, my co-creative director and dear friend, the number of people that come up to him and talk about Arx Fatalis and how it was so deep and interesting, and the very expressive magic system, whatever affected them about Arx Fatalis. The story of the troll that it was his birthday, and he had a flute, and you needed the flute to solve some puzzle, and you have to decide, kill him and take the flute, or leave him with it and try to find another way. I mean, like, it's the simplest stuff, but we're in a medium where once players are engaged, they find their own meaning. It's crazy. And even somebody naming their cat Corvo, yeah, it's amazing. It's an amazing, there's a dark side to it, of course, but I have to say, it feels like a dialogue often, and it's because we're now in an age when you make a change and you really see people. Like at E3 2015, when we announced Emily as the protagonist and also you could play Corvo, the original Corvo reboot that we had, 15 years older, had very short hair, because originally Corvo has the long hair, and we heard from fans, they were like, what the fuck did you do to Corvo's hair? So we ended up making it, we split the difference, it's a little longer. It's not as long as before, but it's a little longer, and it's, yeah, it's so funny.